This conference will now be recorded.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar that is hosted by STEP Philanthropy Advisors Special Interest Group. Today's topic is the 2018 IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report on global warming that was released about a year ago now, and we're going to be considering the implications for wealth holders and opportunities for philanthropy. My name is Gina Pereira. I am the CEO of Dana Philanthropy and a co-chair of the STEP Philanthropy Advisors Special Interest Group. Our mandate is to promote sector developments and best practices in philanthropy to the 20-odd thousand members of STEP globally. Before introducing today's guest presenter, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphones on mute. You will find a button on the left side of your panel with an image of a mic, and it should be marked orange and appear as muted. Second, we will have a slide presentation that's led by our presenter, followed by a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat box that appears at the bottom of your panel, and I will endeavor to raise your questions during the appropriate time. Lastly, this session is being recorded and will be available for replay on the STEP website. Now back to our presentation. You will recall there was a lot of media attention last year focused on the IPCC special report that looked at the impacts of global warming at a 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and compared that with implications with the implications of a 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. The IPCC represents a convening of 190 governments, and those governments identified individuals to analyze studies that were conducted by over 800 scientists, which found that climate-related risks to health, livelihoods, food security, water supply, human security, and economic growth are projected to increase with global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius and increase further with 2 degrees Celsius. The IPCC produced a summary for policymakers, making recommendations to governments for systems transitions to strengthen the global response to climate change in the context of sustainable development. Today's guest will guide us through the implications of these recommendations and identify opportunities that will help the emerging legal frameworks, finance strategies, and an impact economy stronger and mitigate these risks. So finally, I would like to introduce today's guest speaker, Lori Lane Zucker. Lori is the founder and CEO of Impact Entrepreneur, an impact economy business that includes the Impact Entrepreneur Center for Social and Environmental Innovation, the Impact Entrepreneur Network, which is a 21,000 member global network of entrepreneurs, investors, and scholars, and a consulting company that works with blended value companies, impact investors, and academic institutions. For nearly 30 years, Lori has been a pioneer, as dubbed by Forbes, and a recognized leader in sustainability, social enterprise, and impact investing. Lori was the founding executive director of the International Environmental Organization, Orion, which publishes the celebrated Orion magazine, as well as the founder of a global sustainability think tank, Triad Institute, and Hot Frog, a founding B Corporation, GIIRS pioneer company, and the first company ever to complete an equity transaction on an impact investment exchange. In addition to being a prolific speaker on impact-related issues, Lori hosts 2 popular webinar series that attract a global audience and feature leading thinkers and practitioners in impact investing and entrepreneurship. He's a best-selling and multiple award-winning publisher and editor of books and magazines on sustainability and social impact, and the author of numerous articles on entrepreneurship and impact investing. So there's much more that I can say about Lori, but in the interest of time, without further ado, Lori, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar It's a privilege to have you speak to our membership, and I thank you for sharing your time and expertise.
Gina, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you to STEP for giving me this opportunity to talk about these very important issues. So let's just dive in. Hopefully I still have control of the slides. Let me click and see if we can, there we go. So Impact Entrepreneur, Gina just gave you an outline of what we do. Our mission is to create and support a global movement of impact entrepreneurs who are building what we call an impact economy, populated by triple bottom line businesses. So again, triple bottom line, for those who may not be familiar, are businesses that attend to the social, environmental, as well as the financial aspects of business. So triple bottom line businesses fueled by impact investments. Briefly, what we do, Gina already mentioned some of this. We do education to serve our global network of about 21,600 members right now. We do conferences, workshops, leadership summits. We do research and reports. We're about to come out with a report next week or so that we've done for the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools here in the United States, outlining how public charter schools can interact or engage with the impact investing sector. We consult for early and growth stage companies, with educational institutions, with impact investing funds, and others, all within the context or the goal of transformative innovation and systems change. And I'm going to get into that a little bit deeper as we move through the deck. But just again to review kind of the lead-in for this program, that very important report that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released about a year ago, that reports on the impacts of global warming and greenhouse gas emissions in the context of strengthening the global response to the threat of climate change, as well as sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty. That last bit's important for this presentation that I'm giving today. Since then, research keeps coming out, and there's been a whole slew of research that has been put out. The UN has gone kind of deeper into aspects of the 2018 report with a set of other reports. Two ones I'll point to here. In May of 2019, just a few months ago, an Australian climate risk assessment was produced with some very disconcerting information. This was a scenario approach. They project that at current trajectory, we're looking at the collapse of human civilization by around 2050, largely driven by climate change, but other related factors also. Just a few weeks ago, the UN Global Center on Adaptation and World Resources Institute study on adapting to climate change impacts came out. That's an important document because it grows out of the realization that regardless of how aggressive and how effective we are at mitigating future emissions, we are baked into the climate with the existing concentrations in the atmosphere enough that we're going to be we already are seeing significant changes. And so this report was focused on how we can best adapt to climate change impacts. So the point here is that there is voluminous information that continues to come out on climate change. Thankfully, it's finally, after several decades, risen to the top of the agenda for many people around the world. Now, I'll just quickly go back to this slide to the point here that the 2018 report was produced. We talked about climate emissions and climate change in the context of sustainable development and poverty. In 2015, the United Nations released the Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 global goals unanimously approved by all the nations at the end of 2015 for the year, goals for the year 2030. They are also commonly called the global goals or the 2030 agenda. There are 17 goals, and you can see them listed here. There's a lot that can be said about each one. Has been a lot said about each one of these SDGs. The UN has a wonderful website that presents each of the SDGs, talks about the challenges inherent in them, talks about the opportunities, the business opportunities. It's a tremendous resource for investors, for educators, and for general citizens. As you look through this list, you can kind of stay on each one for quite a long time. As you'll see, there are two SDGs that are particularly focused on climate and energy and fossil fuel emissions. That's SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, and SDG 13, climate action. What's really important here, and what that earlier phrase on the climate report that I pointed out to you makes, is that these SDGs should not be taken kind of in isolation from each other. There is tremendous overlap between the SDGs. You cannot talk about climate action. You cannot talk about clean energy without also bringing into the conversation and weighing in the balance many, if not all, of these other SDGs. So the interrelationship between the SDGs is very important, and something that was very conscious in the minds of those the people who put together the climate report. So the big takeaway from the 2018 climate report was that urgent and unprecedented changes across all levels of civilization, of human society, and of course that includes business, includes investment, includes the economy. Unprecedented changes need to take place in the next 10, 11 years for us to mitigate the worst of what climate change is bringing on. So that's the urgency there. And I think probably most of you on the call, are very aware of these things. So I'm going to spend much of my time talking about kind of the positive sides to the change that is upon us, is happening, and that hopefully we will embrace in a very ambitious way. By taking ambitious climate action, there are many benefits for shared prosperity and economic stabilities, such as more jobs, increased energy access, access to sustainable transportation, and health improvements, just a few of the many benefits. It's been, there are lots of accountings out there, but one related to the climate report is that bold climate action can deliver $26 trillion in economic benefits through 2030, while generating more than 65 million jobs. And that report said avoiding more than 700,000 premature deaths from air pollution in 2030. As I said, other research has come out. I should mention that in April, the National Academy of Sciences came out with a pollution report and health report, and showed that 700,000 fake premature death figure that you see there was well understated. They project that annually 3 to 4.2 million people per year die of fossil fuel related pollution. That's 194,000 in the United States, 1.6 million deaths in China, 692,000 deaths in India. It's mind-boggling just how destructive that aspect of our use of fossil fuels is to human health. So unprecedented changes at all levels of society is what the climate report calls for. We focus on, we call this transformation here at Impact Entrepreneur, and many of the people who are kind of involved in the kind of work that we do see this process as a transformative process. We at Impact Entrepreneur, when I coined the term Impact Entrepreneur in 2011, I defined impact for our uses as transformation. So the Impact Entrepreneur is an entrepreneur who undertakes innovation within a transformative context. The impact investor, while we certainly key on the Global Impact Investing Network's definition of impact investment as investments that seek positive, measurable social and environmental return alongside financial return. While we embrace that, we also feel strongly that the impact, given the urgency, given what I've already laid out here, that it needs to be done within a transformational context, a presumption of systems change. We also define impact as the rigorous application of blended value, giving a big nod there to Jen Emerson's excellent foundational work on blended value. Again, the blended value is the triple bottom line, the blending of environmental, social, and financial. Now, when we look at this term transformation, what does that mean, and where does Impact Entrepreneur take it, and how deep down the rabbit hole do we go in describing transformation and its relationship to climate change, to impact investing, and to impact economy building? Here's one way I describe it, metaphorically. Now, I'm not a brain scientist, but we do know that different hemispheres of the brain kind of function in different ways and have different attributes to them. Metaphorically speaking, let's see the current business, conventional business, brain chemistry as hemispheres operating by themselves. That's social, that environmental, that financial, those centers of activity being separated by, let's say, firewalls. They don't engage with each other. They don't inform each other. This is why we get, in common business terms, the creation of what are called external factors or externalities in business accounting and economic thinking. I would argue that this is a dysfunctional operating system. This is unhealthy brain chemistry. And we see that in the impacts that the current economy, the negative impacts the current economy is having on the global ecosystem or ecosystems and aspects of human health. So let's take what would a impact economy brain chemistry look like? Well, those firewalls are not there. They're gone. They've been dissolved, and you've got interrelationship between those hemispheres of the brain. They're speaking to each other constantly, and you've got a very holistic, I would say, healthy flow of blood through all the communication through those hemispheres. That's the triple bottom line. That's the brain chemistry of the impact economy that we're starting to see really emerge now in the world of business and investment. A new system is emerging. And we're seeing evidence of this in many places. Gina mentioned in in introducing me that I started one of the first B corporations. I hope many of you may already know what B corporations are. There are 3,000 approximately certified B corporations in the world right now. That's an assessment certification administrated by B Lab, a nonprofit organization in Philadelphia that certifies or assesses the ESG, the environmental social governance aspects of businesses, and if they get a passing score, they get certified B Corporation certification. Very exciting. Been going for about 12 years now. Other aspects of this emerging system, circular economy is a really crucial principle that's being embraced, and set of practices that are being embraced in the business world. As we've talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, TONIC, we talked about the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network. TONIC is one of several communities of investors, mainly angel investors, that are entirely focused on impact investing. And for many of them, they are doing it within this kind of context of essential systems change. Educationally, we're seeing programs in universities, in business schools, embracing sustainability. I'm on the board of the University of Vermont's Sustainable MBA, Sustainable Innovation MBA program. 5 years ago, they threw out their traditional MBA program. They said, we want to create a new one that is centered around sustainability and sustainable innovation. And they've done a wonderful job of growing that program over the last 5 years. So there are some examples of a new system, this new, what we call the impact economy emerging. An impact economy that is equitable, just, resilient, fair, ethical, caring, that embraces key concepts in sustainability thinking, such as regenerative, circular, cradle to cradle. It's transformed. Now let's start focusing on the financial, the investment side of all of this. Looking at, talking briefly about how some countries, or some of those who work at the country level, are grappling with the climate change challenge and the SDGs and the amazing investment opportunities that are inherent in the SDGs. In the graphic you're seeing here, this is one research agency's breaking down. This is a year or two old now, so the numbers probably look a bit different currently, but this gives you a sense of some of the business opportunities, investment opportunities broken down by SDG related sectors. As I note on the left side of this slide, ATP, one of Europe's biggest pension funds, has teamed up last year with 5 other pension funds in Denmark to launch the Danish SDG focused investment fund. Talking briefly, now most of my work is with early and growing private companies, but just to speak briefly, and we can go into it more deeply in the Q&A later, but to speak briefly about the public companies. What's really interesting here is that Price Waterhouse this year came out with a report that said already 72% of companies are mentioning the SDGs in their reports. That's a much higher figure than I was thinking. I see a lot of sustainability reports. I know a lot of sustainability reporting is being done in the corporate sector, but I didn't know it was as high as 72%. That's wonderful. They raised a caution that only 19% mention the SDGs in the CEO letter, and as somebody who's engaged in a international group of sustainability that it's called a Sustainability Context Group. It's made up of mostly sustainability professionals within corporations. The common complaint is that a lot of this work is being done to measure, to report in their sustainability reports on their impact, but in too many cases, those findings do not get up all the way to the CEO's office or the C-level office suites and really impact practices at a deep level. Now, that certainly is not the case for a growing number of companies. Let's just say Unilever, because they're a real model of a large multinational company that really, in my opinion, has authentically embraced sustainability principles, the SDGs, and are doing quite a good job of integrating sustainability thinking throughout their supply chain and business practices. Something that just happened a week or two ago, which is really noteworthy, is that the Business Roundtable, which is a collection of hundreds of major corporations, released a new statement on the purpose of a corporation. Now, last time this group, which is decades old, came out with a statement on the purpose of a corporation, it was quite a while ago, and it was really focused on shareholder primacy as the main purpose. Now, that's shifted profoundly in this new statement, which shifts the purpose away from shareholder primacy to stakeholder primacy. So taking into consideration the people who are affected at different levels by the activities of a business, taking into consideration, of course, the environment and the impact on environment, including climate. Very important statement that came out just a week or two ago. Now, I want to spend the last time of the slides talking about philanthropy, because I know this group has a strong philanthropy focus, and because I do speak to family office groups rather frequently, I'm aware of the fact that for many of you, if not all of you, you have clients, you have wealth holders that you're helping that have a very important philanthropy side to what they do with their capital. And now I'm going to make the case here that everything that I've presented to you up till now makes, I believe, a really strong clarion call for the transformation of philanthropy. Now, to make this case, I'm going to bring in some help. Over the last year, starting the summer of 2018, teamed up with Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, and we did several projects together, all with the same theme. Started with a international leadership summit that we hosted here in Massachusetts, down the street from our office, and then 2 reports flowed from that leadership summit. The 45, 50 people who attended that were a combination of philanthropy professionals, senior people from Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, impact investing thought leaders, and systems change think tanks. The 2 reports, well, we had a longer report, the one on the left here, that we released initially, that reported on all that went on during the summit. Then the second document on the right is a distilled version of that longer report. It is a call to action and quite a concise set of recommendations that flowed from all this work of the summit, the people at the summit. the work that was done in creating the report. So I'm going to share with you some of the thinking behind what drove that project and the findings. The guiding question that brought us together was this: that philanthropy sits at the nexus of wealth and purpose. And what is its role in helping to create economic, financial, and investment systems that serve people and planet and not the other way around? Okay, well, this we can call, say, the new philanthropy. Now, I'm going to speak here specifically about philanthropy in the United States because I'm aware of the fact that particularly foundations and philanthropic structures and legalities vary from country to country. United States, of course, has a 100+ year very strong tradition of philanthropy, lots of foundations, so I'm going to this data flows from that which is happening in the United States. So there's around $1 trillion that's sitting in philanthropic endowments in the United States. Now, as you may know, the legal stipulations here in the States are that a foundation, now we're talking about endowed foundations here, need only grant 5% of assets each year. And we know from several research institutions inside philanthropy, the Foundation Center, that only about 17% of foundations are currently pursuing impact investing strategies today. Now, what that means is that most philanthropic money is what I would call sitting on the sidelines. Okay, it's that 95% that's not being invested is just sitting there in endowments, and arguably, it's feeding and perpetuating the current system because most of that money is just being invested in the market in traditional investments. It's not mission aligned. It's not helping to further the philanthropic mission of the institution. This points to a problem. One of the problems with philanthropy is that it was not designed to change systems, but rather to fix the potholes in the current system. Now, these are a set of problems, particularly in the context of the urgent need for transformation, deep-seated change, systems change that we've spoken about earlier in the presentation. This all points to what I would call, another reflection of that dysfunctional operating system, that faulty brain chemistry. There are some here in the United States that are actually, maybe they're not saying this out loud, but they, through their actions, they are kind of calling into question whether the philanthropy model is obsolete. Is it ready to be retired? Now, I'm not making an argument for that, but I think if you look at initiatives like the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Lauren Jobs, Emerson Collective, Steve Jobs' widow's investment charitable work, the Pritzker's Blue Haven Initiative, and the Boston Impact Initiative. Each of these wealth holders wanted to do quote unquote charitable work. But in each of these cases, they did not just set up a foundation and go. They, in certain cases, like the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, they created an LLC. They wanted more flexibility to do more than just give grants to nonprofits. So that's a really interesting thing, just to look at choices that are being made by people who are bringing a lot of charitable capital to the table in recent months and years, and that they're asking themselves, well, is the models that have built up around philanthropy in the United States, are they still valid? Are they still the most useful ways to structure that? So now, going further with the theme of the new philanthropy and stepping away for a moment from the idea that we need to throw out the whole concept of at least the foundation, we can look at some really good examples of existing foundations here in the States that in the last few years are doing really interesting work in what we can call the new philanthropy. So the Heron Foundation and Nathan Cummings Foundation and several other foundations have gone all in. So they are committed, Heron being the first one, quite notably, to commit to 100% of all their assets being mission aligned with a wholehearted embrace of impact investing to do that. Benefit Chicago, a collaboration between MacArthur Foundation and two other Chicago area foundations. Well, Calvert's international, but have a strong Chicago focus. They've committed $100 million to impact investing, not simply grant giving to nonprofits, but helping to build and investing in the building up of social enterprises in the Chicago region. MacArthur, Rockefeller Foundation, Omidyar have last year started the Catalytic Capital Consortium, another sizable chunk of money that is focused on catalyzing early stage initiatives, social enterprises, initiatives that are advancing in positive ways the SDGs. San Francisco Foundation's another good example, recent commitment to impact investing. Mission Investors Exchange is a cutting edge group, if you don't know it, that is really working hard with foundations here in the States to get them to move much more of their capital into impact investing. Now, in the call to action, I'm not going to go through all of the things. We had quite a few recommendations in that document. You can find it on our website at www.impactalchemist.com. That both reports are available there, when you do the deep dive into all the recommendations in the call to action. Just to highlight a few of them and go deep on at least one of them, we really called for philanthropists and philanthropic institutions to be investing in helping to build the infrastructure, scaffolding and architecture of the impact economy, funding think tanks, funding innovation hubs. There's a whole set of recommendations around that. Use an integrated finance strategy. I'm going to speak more about that in just a moment. Also, create collaboratively between philanthropists and foundations, create and follow a roadmap of how to deploy the philanthropic dollars optimally toward an impact economy. And also that there needs to be a recognition that there's a shift in organizational culture and governance that needs to take place, particularly in kind of long established foundations that may not be kind of have in their existing DNA the kind of entrepreneurial mentality that's going to be necessary here to help provide higher risk capital to earlier stage initiatives, many of which are going to fail. That's just what happens with entrepreneurship. But there's going to be need to be a shift in the culture as well as the governance of philanthropic institutions to move in this direction. Now, as I said, I want to focus on integrated finance strategy because I think that this is a really crucial and absolutely cutting edge piece of the impact investing space. What is integrated finance strategy? It's a finance strategy that brings philanthropy and philanthropic instruments under the same strategic umbrella with debt, equity, and equity capital to expand available capital and create a more sophisticated funding continuum better suited to the evolutionary cycle and needs of revenue generating organizations and social enterprises. So there's a lot that one can say about integrated finance strategy, and I want to finish off the slide presentation soon so we can get to the conversation, the Q&A, but just to pull out a few of the key takeaways here. Integrated finance strategy, by bringing philanthropy and the philanthropic objectives and instruments under that same strategic umbrella with your investment, with your debt and equity capital, you suddenly start seeing this new continuum and set of options arise, and it makes more possible the providing of long-term patient capital provided at lower return and for longer rates. It can give improved sources of seed stage capital for small businesses and startups. You can increasingly, there's the use of donor advised funds. There's a lot that can be said around that. It's a very exciting potential, the use of donor advised funds for those wealth holders that, whether it be the scale of funds that they can bring to bear, or for other reasons, they may find that instead of setting up their own foundation, channeling philanthropic monies through a donor advised fund to early stage impact economy businesses is an attractive thing to do. So there's a set of examples of how integrated finance strategy can be employed by philanthropists with the goal within this goal of impact economy building. Finally, I'm going to just give you a quick example of what this can look like when you create that new umbrella of where philanthropy is in conversation with employing that impact economy brain chemistry I talked about. So you can look at this chart as kind of maybe a new archetype for a funding cycle or funding continuum for an early stage social enterprise or impact economy business. You might see in this strategy, you can employ grants or guarantees that have no expectation of return. Just say, this is a good idea, go with it. I know I may lose this money, but I'm seeing this as a grant, or it is a grant. There's no expectation of return. Take this idea, develop it. At a certain stage, they may be ready for concessionary capital. Now, let's face it, social enterprises, in part because they are often very disruptive, and they're often disruptive at multiple levels. That often means that there is a longer timeline to maturity, growth, profitability, and in that longer timeline, the use or the ability to employ concessionary debt, concessionary capital that has a lower interest rate, that kind of sits in between that grant making, no expectation of return, and kind of traditional market return. That is a crucial place that integrated impact finance strategy can be contributing. As that company moves along, their revenues grows, market rate debt becomes reasonable and doesn't overstretch them. And then, of course, there's private equity. There is a strong kind of interest or growing interest in the private equity impact investing world to not be talking so much about swift exits and very high multiple returns as the objective, and looking more toward that patient capital, revenue-based returns, dividend-based returns, ways of maintaining mission over long term. So I'll just leave you with this last thought that and is end of our call to action, that a growing number of individuals and philanthropic organizations are demonstrating how to move beyond incremental change to real transformation. But their success rests in their ability to shift the complex systems in which those problems exist, and that is influenced by how they are funded, the strength and efficacy of their networks, and whether collectively individuals and organizations are intervening in different ways that together add up to a meaningful transition to new paradigms and structures. And with that, I'm going to, there's my contact information, and I'm going to pass it back over to Gina and move into the Q&A.
Thank you, Lori. That was an excellent overview and of an important issue and how philanthropy can play a more involved and meaningful role in working towards achieving the SDGs and mitigating the risks that are outlined in the IPCC climate report. Before we open the floor to questions, I'd like to ask you something with respect to the estimated costs of achieving the SDGs. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the UN has estimated that in order to achieve the targets for 2030, that the SDG cost would be approximately or between 5 and 7 trillion per year.
Yes.
Can you give us any idea of what has been invested annually thus far and how close we are to that mark? Because I think it can help us to see the importance of philanthropic capital becoming more involved.
Yeah, that 5 to 7 trillion figure is commonly used. I think it's based on a lot of UN research and reporting. I've seen kind of a range of more 3 trillion to 7 trillion, but still, those are big numbers. That's per year. And right now, we're not in the trillions, we're in the billions, especially as far as the impact investing space is concerned. Impact investing is growing in leaps and bounds, as probably many of you know. Last 2 years, the Global Impact Investing Network's annual report has reported that the space has doubled. So it went from just in the last year, 2018, to or the end of 2017, the end of 2018, the space grew from 200 and I think it was $28 billion to $528 billion. I think those numbers are roughly accurate. It's growing very fast, but it's still not in the trillions. So this is where leveraging philanthropy and that $1 trillion that's in foundations here in the United States and other philanthropic pots, whether they be in the United States or in different parts of the world. It's really a crucial piece of that puzzle. I like to, let me just give you an example of what we're looking at here on a country level. We did a case study webinar a few months ago on Nigeria, and I just find it so interesting. You can say it's kind of like a canary in the coal mine of our future. I don't know how much all of you know about Nigeria. I'm not an expert on Nigeria, but I learned a lot going through this process of creating this webinar. But Nigeria, which is kind of a middle-sized, geographically speaking, African country, has a lot of people in it. It has grown in the last number of years from around 80 million to 200 million people. And this is a country the size, a bit larger than Texas, about half the size of Alaska. UN projections are that the population is going to, in the next 30 years, by 2050, it's going to grow to 500 million people, 500 million people. And the projection for 2100 to 2100 is that Nigeria is going to be almost 1 billion people, 900 and some odd million people, again, in that size country. Now, at the same time, Nigeria has put out some climate reports of their own on, and also the UN on that part of Africa, that shows that climate change is already impacting many industries in Nigeria. But the major report that I looked at showed that it's going to impact pretty every industry, from agriculture to water, everything, over the next coming years. The challenges when you're looking at metrics like this are unbelievably large, and so that just adds to the urgency here and to why we need to mobilize more capital, as much capital as possible, not only to places like Nigeria, but to every place around the world, because every place is going to be suffering in its own ways through with climate change and related issues or challenges. On the plus side, in Nigeria, you have an extraordinary, you have I would say a relatively well-educated population. It's a bit concerning that the educational level has dropped, literacy levels dropped from 57% to 51% in the last few years. But on the whole, it's well-educated country, and there is a very fast-growing entrepreneurial ecosystem that is growing there. Lofty Inc. is a good example of a investment fund and management consulting group that is helping to build that entrepreneurial ecosystem in Nigeria. But I think sometimes when we talk about these big numbers, to kind of focus on an example is helpful to get our hands around both the challenges as well as the opportunities.
Thank you. Lori, I was wondering if you could also spend a little bit of time talking a bit about more or elaborating on the integrated finance opportunities. We see increasing examples of blended finance where what I think is really interesting is how philanthropic capital can de-risk a lot of investments to the point where then these enterprises can attract more commercial investors, more traditional commercial investors. I'd love it if you could expand on that synergy and perhaps give us some examples of who's doing cutting edge work in the area of integrated finance.
Sure. So not everyone makes this distinction between quote unquote blended finance and integrated finance. I do, just because it's useful. Blended finance historically or traditionally has generally, to my understanding, related to the use of or the employment of public funds, of governmental expenditures, in such a way as to leverage private capital investment, and that's been done for quite a long time. Integrated finance, as I see it, and as I see others, those who are really on the cutting edge here employing it, are really bringing in this philanthropic piece and understanding or seeing that it really is the natural area or a natural playground or sandbox for philanthropy to be playing in, is to be providing that early risk capital that that has that. When you're talking about the entrepreneurial ecosystem in general, you're talking about anywhere from 80% to 98% of startups failing. That's, there's different people have different failure rates, but they're all very high. And with social enterprises, with that longer, often longer timeline to growth and development, based in part on the disruption factor I spoke about, that makes the need and use of higher risk capital all the more important over longer periods of time. So it's really a natural place for philanthropic monies to come in and play a role, and it's desperately needed. I've been an entrepreneur. I've walked that path. I know how difficult it is to find capital at the earlier stages. And indeed, with my company, Hot Frog, which was one of the first B corporations, the first capital that I got with that company was grant money from the Christensen Fund in Palo Alto. And thank goodness for them. They were well ahead of their time in supporting such a thing as a B corporation. So who is doing cutting edge work in this area? Omidyar, for sure, is doing great work in integrated finance. They give grants, they do investments, they do loans, they do all of it. They've been there, and they do a lot of good thought leadership in terms of publishing. Their staff have published numerous pieces in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is one of the key areas, key publications alongside, say, Impact Alpha, Next Billion. Those are a couple other really good, useful resources, media sources for the impact investing space. So Omidyar, RSF Finance in San Francisco, absolutely cutting edge. They've been thought leaders in impact investing forever. They actually have an integrated finance institute for financial professionals to come be trained in integrated finance. So that's the first of those kind. That's the first of its kind. So they deserve a lot of credit for that, for being well ahead of the game there. Boston Impact Initiative. It's a local initiative working in the outskirts and the underserved areas around Boston. Absolutely cutting edge. Deborah Fries and her husband. It's a family operation. They, as I mentioned earlier, like the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, like the Emerson Collective, they said it's just doing philanthropy, just giving grants is not what we want to do, and just doing impact investments, equity investments, not what we want to do. It's not what this community needs. It needs to be much more sensitively employed, that capital. And so you see them doing absolutely cutting edge work in terms of giving grants, doing loans, occasionally doing equity. They are models for what is not only integrated finance, but this very fast growing and exciting node of impact investing, which we're calling place-based investing or place-based impact investing, which is taking off certainly here in the United States. I'm seeing it also beginning to be employed elsewhere outside, but that is as you might expect from the name, is employing capital to on a local and regional basis to develop the economy there. So there's some examples for you.
Thank you, Lori. Now I'm aware we have 2 minutes left. I'd like you to give the audience some guidance, recognizing the importance of measurement of both social and environmental impacts of investments. In fact, I think that's critical. Where do you think that investors should be looking for current best practices in impact measurement? What are some resources that you can point them out to?
Sure. Yeah, this is, as you might expect, a crucial area. How do we maintain, especially with the rapid growth of impact investing and the huge buzz of impact investing, how do we maintain its rigor, its authenticity, and so this focus on impact measurement has been there from the beginning. How do we measure the social and environmental positive impacts that we're making, and that be on the company side, also on the investor side? I mean, impact investing funds need to report to their investors, have their impact reports. So they need to have methodologies for doing that measurement. So it's been a bit of a Wild West show, frankly, over the last 12, 13 years as impact investing's come on. Lots and lots of platforms and attempts to create the go-to management system or measurement system. And up until recently, I would have to say that no one has kind of become the go-to place. But I will point to two initiatives, and there are a lot of good ones out there, a lot of good approaches and really interesting approaches that you can look at. But two that I think would be fair to say are ones to key in on are the Global Impact Investing Network's own IRIS Plus, which is the second version of IRIS, and that is a what they call a generally accepted system for measuring and managing and optimizing impact. And they've created a wonderful system that other platforms that are doing impact measurement can use, a taxonomy and a process. So that's definitely one to look at. Another one is called Impact Management Project, and that is a coalition of a large number of very sophisticated impact measurement professionals who have come together to try to create best practices in the space. IMP is how Impact Management Project is often referred to, is definitely emerging as another kind of generally accepted and embraced form, notably you can tell from the name, they don't call it Impact Measurement Project, Impact Management Project. One of their key findings that they've really run with is that it's one thing to measure impact. It's actually also crucial, but also somewhat easier to do impact management. So they brought those two principles together in the measurement and the management, managing for impact within the organization, and have come up with done some really beautiful work there.
Great, thank you, Lori. Well, we're out of time. We did have a request from one of our listeners as to whether it would be possible to share the presentation. Barring any objections from you, Lori.
Not at all, not at all.
Great. I have my email address up there. I'd be happy to send the slides. And of course, you have Lori's contact information as well that I've got up on the screen. This presentation is being recorded and will be up on the STEP website. So you can also listen to it again or access any of the information by connecting with the link that should be available just by typing in the name of the webinar, or just looking into STEP webinars. You'll be able to find it easily. So Lori, on behalf of STEP, I'd like to thank you for an interesting and informative discussion. I also want to give you an opportunity to have the last word. Before I do that, thank you to everyone who has joined us today. We hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. Lori, perhaps you want to take the opportunity to mention your regular webinars. I believe you have one coming up this week.
We do, yeah. We do have two webinar series. We do one every couple of weeks. The one on Thursday is on intergovernmental organizations, INGOs, and impact investing. So how big nonprofit organizations are starting to embrace impact investing. We just did one last week on the IRIS Plus. I just mentioned, or 2 weeks ago on IRIS Plus, the Global Impact Investing Network. So we have a whole webinar on that. We're doing one on DAFs in a few weeks, or actually the end of October. So you can find out all about those webinars and all the other work on impactalchemist.com, our website. And yeah, and if you're interested in reaching out to me to talk about our work consulting, we're looking to create the first integrated impact finance vehicle, a funding vehicle for early stage investments. If you're interested in learning more about that project or anything else, just be in touch with me. But thank you, Gina. This was a wonderful opportunity for me to share things that are really close to my heart and that we're focusing on now.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all. We'll sign off now.